Hello guys and welcome back to another video. So today I'm going to be covering my answer to a question I often see asked in the forums, and that question is, how exactly do I go about leveling my tank in a timely fashion, as Sword and Board doesn't actually lend itself too well to high DPS, which means we're not going to be clearing content as fast as we could as if we were spec as a DPS, for example. And that is exactly the answer many people will give these individuals who are asking how to level their tanks. Just spec as a DPS, level up that way by going to a grind spot, and then go back to tanking when you're done with that. Now the main issue I see with that is if by going with that mindset, when we do get to sort of maybe level 50 or CP 160 when we want to go back to tanking, we'll have very little understanding of how to actually tank, which in turn might have negative ramifications because we might die, we might not hold aggro very well, we might just suffer a little bit, which in turn means our experience in veteran dungeons or content like that could be quite bad, and that's something I want to try and help alleviate by making a build, which I have today, which is designed to give you a little bit of tanking experience, while also allowing you to clear content quickly because we also have some pretty good DPS, at least for a lower level character. Anyways, without further ado, with that spiel over, let's get into the first part of the build. And the first thing I want to talk about is the attributes and the supportive elements. So as you see, we've put most into stamina, and in terms of a right or wrong, pretty much just go to as your taste. So what I mean by that is, if you want to put all into stamina for more damage, go ahead and do that, and if you want a little bit more health, feel free to do so as well. Now in terms of the Mundus Stone, we're going with the Serpent, and the reason we're doing this is because stamina recovery is very important if we want to be able to enable ourselves to do as much DPS as possible, and at lower levels we're not going to be blocking as much, meaning that our stamina recovery will actually be active and not set to 0, because we won't be blocking as much. This is particularly important, the Serpent Mundus, when we are low CP, so if you're a player who's just starting out, you'll find that your resource management, especially when we don't have all the tools available to us when we just start a new character, is a little bit tricky, and so the Serpent just helps us actually keep our stamina up to a reasonable level, in addition to heavy attacks, weaving and things like that. Moving now on to the other aspects, so in terms of food and pot use, it's probably another thing you're thinking about. When you are just starting, you might not have access to all of these, but on the bright side with pots, these do drop from enemies when we kill them, so I'd recommend using the trash stamina pots to allow us to cast more stamina abilities, and as you'll see, this build does primarily use stamina abilities, and when it does use Magicka, it's primarily for buffs. In terms of our food choices, in a similar vein to our pots, we don't really have access to the best of the best when we're leveling, so if you can get access to food, I'd recommend using max health and stamina food, just to make us a little bit more tanky and also allow us to do some more damage in terms of just increasing our max stamina pool, which in turn increases our amount of damage you do with our stamina abilities. In terms of the importance of these, I'd say that they become more important as we do level up, because the way that scaling works, it means that we're going to sort of be normalizing our stats as we do reach the higher levels, meaning that when we start out, we should have more stats, but as we slowly level up towards 160, our stats are going to decrease, and that's when it kind of necessitates our using of food. That's just something I wanted to address, primarily because most people are also a little bit confused about how scaling works, and the general idea is that you start with a lot of stats, and then it kind of scales down, because the game expects us to have more tools, to have enchants, and to use food, and that's why when you get to CP 160, our health might be dramatically lower than when we first started our character, so it's important to keep that in mind. Moving now on to the first part of the build in terms of sets, and the first set I recommend is 5-piece Vampire's Kiss, and we're using 5-piece Heavy. Now the importance of the set, it is nice that we're getting a little bit of tankiness in the first few set bonuses, but the 5-piece especially shines for us because it allows us in any content we're doing, be it trash farms, be it quests, or be it dungeon content, to give us a really nice strong self-heal whenever we kill an enemy. Now this is particularly important at lower levels because often at lower levels we don't have access to a few good heals, and self-healing is quite important when we're doing content, especially in solo or duo groups. This 5-piece is also especially strong because it synergizes well with our two-handed abilities and allows us to complete content which might otherwise necessitate 2 people or more. This was hammered home to me when I was in a 2-man farm group with one of my friends, and he was dying quite often while I myself was able to maintain aggro on 20 plus enemies, and by maintain aggro I mean they were hammering on me the whole time while he was dead, and I didn't die whatsoever and could last for minutes at a time, just tanking ads, with no problem whatsoever. So this is why this set is particularly strong, and it'll become more apparent when you see the gameplay as well as when we talk about the two-handed abilities that we're using. In terms of the trait and enchantment discussion, in a similar vein to the food, enchantments become more important as we're getting higher level, and that means that we might want to consider actually crafting new gear every 20 levels or so perhaps we craft it when we're level 3 or level whatever we are when we first start, and then we make one at level 20 and a new set at level 40, and we enchant it then when we have access to it at a higher level hopefully. When we are enchanting, I recommend max stamina on all of it, just to increase our stamina as much as possible, which allows us to block for longer and also increases our damage of our stamina-based abilities. In terms of the traits, I find training to be the best all-round trait, as while it won't give us too much value when we're doing quests because there's less enemies to kill, it will certainly pay dividends when we're doing farming where we're killing, groups of 15 to 20 enemies at one time. Moving now on to the next set, and this is a set where if you might have, not so many traits, it's worth keeping in mind. So this is a 6 trait set, which is a little bit higher than our 5 trait set of Vampire's Kiss, and so this is good because it provides us with some nice critical and stamina, which in turn increases our DPS. Now, if you are looking for a lower trait option, Ashen Grip and Death Silence, I believe it's called, are 2 good 2 trait options if you want to run that, and they'll allow you to increase your DPS. Now, not too much to say about this, but probably the main thing to note about this is that it is 1 piece light and 1 piece medium. And just to remind everybody, 5 piece of the Vampire's Kiss. This means that we're running a 5 piece heavy, 1 piece light, and 1 piece medium setup. And this is important because it allows us to level up both our light armor, our medium armor, and our heavy armor all at once, so that when we do hit the time where we want to switch into our tanking role, we'll have all of the armor abilities available to us, or at least have most of the passive available, but most importantly, we'll have our heavy armor maxed out for sure, which is the most important armor piece or armor type to actually have maxed out, as the passives lend itself quite well to us tanking. This is actually also going to carry in to our ability discussion, as when you are leveling, you want to ensure that you're leveling up as many trees as possible to ensure that we have as many options open to us when we finally hit a level where we want to actually get into our proper build and start tanking content, so that we're not limited in what tools we have available to us. In terms of the jewelry, very quickly, pretty much just whatever you can get to drop and just use that. I don't recommend buying jewelry as it's been quite costly, and farming it honestly can be a little bit boring, especially if we're just wanting to progress through the game, be that questing or be that, going into sort of grind groups where we're just getting what we can and sort of taking what comes to us. So not much to say about that. And with regards to enchants, if you can get weapon damage enchants, go ahead and slot these on your rings, but it's not a big deal, and if you can get by perfectly fine. Moving now on to our weapon choices. So we have sword and board in our front bar, and we have a two-handed sword in our back bar. Now the reasoning behind this is we want to be able to, if we're in a dungeon for example, we want sword and board to be able to sort of tank the enemies effectively, but if we're doing questing or if we're doing grinds, we want our two-hander to provide us with damage and an effective way of sort of killing enemies in a very, fast manner so that we can maximize the XP we're gaining. In terms of traits, I recommend Sharpened, as this will increase our damage quite well, and it's probably the most worthwhile trait. And you'll be wondering why on our sword. Well, sometimes when we're doing some content, we may want to actually use our sword and board, as it may hit a little bit hard, so it just allows us to, get things done a little bit quickly because we're doing more damage. In terms of enchantments, in a similar vein to our, to our rings and our jewelry, pretty much anything you can find, anything that deals more damage, just enchant it with that. But if you can't get it, don't worry too much about it. And I just want to stress that this whole build can be done pretty much, without many enchants, without weapon enchants, and even without food or pots to a certain extent until you get up to the higher levels. Now, in terms of sort of upgrading your gear, I've already touched on maybe, upgrading your gear every 20 levels or so. This is probably the most important part. If you leave your gear at, say, level 5, and that's, that's okay, I get it, sometimes it's a pain to recraft gear. The one thing I would say is, absolutely, you want to try and upgrade is your sword every 10 to 20 levels, because it's going to be providing extra weapon damage, which means you're just going to be doing more damage overall, which is going to speed up the amount of time it takes for you to clear certain content, and you will thank yourself for going ahead and upgrading this down the line, as it means you'll be getting, to level 50 faster, it means you'll be getting through your quests faster, it means you'll just be doing your dungeons more efficiently, and it's something you'll see the most benefit from. The benefit from these will be a little bit minor probably, but the benefit from this will be particularly apparent, and you really will notice a difference between a level 5 and a level 30 sword when you are progressing towards higher end levels. Let's now move on to discussion regarding our skills. And this is going to be in a similar vein to how I talked about using 5-piece heavy, 1-piece light, and 1-piece medium to level up our armor skill lines. So first off, I want to talk about a little bit of philosophy about this build. And obviously, since there's various classes, I may want to make this applicable for any class. The important part to keep in mind is we want to try and have one self-heal at least on our build, in addition to one AoE effect. And also we want to try and have our front bar here being in a somewhat tanky fashion, while also ensuring that we have all of our class skill lines in this case assassination, shadow, and siphoning, represented on the bar so that we're leveling all of them up at the same time, meaning that we can unlock all of the crucial passives from when we're tanking a later content, which is much harder and does necessitate us being able to incorporate all of our abilities at our disposal. So the first ability we use is Pierce Armor. Now I don't want to get too much into this, but basically it's a nice taunt tool, so if we are doing dungeons we can maintain aggro on the main boss so that our allies who are squishier don't die. In addition, it debuffs the enemy, which means they're going to be taking more damage. Refreshing Path is our nice self-heal for Nightblades, and it's one you can get quite early, so I'd recommend getting this and morphing it to Refreshing Path so that not only does it provide a nice damage over time effect, but also heals us up, and is kind of like a key aspect of this build, which you'll see later on. In addition, it also provides us some major resistances as a Nightblade, so it means we can be quite tanky. And as you see, it ticks off our shadow line on our bar. Just like, to go back to it, our Pierce Armor ticks off our one-handed shield on our bar. Now the next ability we have is Swallow Soul. Now this is a nice self-heal and also makes us a little bit more tanky and is particularly useful as a heal over time effect, just to cast it once and then swap back to our two-hander, or is nice if we're tanking on our sword and board, just to make ourselves, a little bit tankier and also to allow our allies to heal us a little bit stronger. So this also takes off our siphoning ability, as we now have that represented on our bar, meaning that it will also be getting leveled up when we gain XP. Now the next ability is Heroic Slash, and it's in the one-handed shield line again. This is just to debuff the boss if we're fighting them to make them do less damage, and is a strong ability also because it provides us some nice ultimate regeneration, meaning more Veil of Blades, which can be quite crucial when we're fighting multiple enemies at once for just, doing damage to them and also making sure that you take less damage from them. The next ability we have is Assassin's Blade. This is a nice execute, and it's on our bar just to allow us to level up Assassination as well, so that if we just review our bars, you see we have Assassination, we have our Shadow ability, we have our Siphoning ability, alongside also having our one-handed shield abilities on our bar, and we're also leveling up our light, our medium, and our heavy armor. In terms of ultimate use, we have Veil of Blades here, and this is on our front bar, probably because it's the most efficient in terms of when we're tanking, we want to be using this because we don't have Warhorn. Let's now quickly move on to our back bar. Now in terms of our back bar, you'll notice straight away that we have Pierce Armor here, and you might think that's a little bit weird. And the reason we have Pierce Armor here is that even though we don't have our sword and board active, we can still get XP on our sword and board when we don't have it active by having an ability from that line on our skill bar. This means that when we're getting XP over two-handers, such as when we're farming multiple enemies in certain, ad farms, for example, if we slot Pierce Armor, it means we can still level up our sword and board skill line without ever having to use sword and board. And so this is an efficient way of doing so. Obviously we can't use it, but on the bright side we don't actually need too many abilities, and we do have a nice slot open to be able to incorporate this. Now in a similar vein to what I talked about on our front bar, we're going to have Refreshing Path for our shadow line, we're going to have Siphoning Strikes, which allows us to get some sustain, though obviously if you don't have this unlocked you can just use any ability, and I just want to reinforce that. If whatever you have unlocked, just feel free to slot that, and obviously when you get a better option, please feel free to replace it. So yes, this covers our Siphoning Strikes, and if, once again, if we go to Assassination, we have Mirage, which is covering that there, and this is a really good tank buff for Nightblades, though once again, use whatever you have available to you in a particular tree. Now Soul Harvest is actually particularly strong for farming, especially solo farming, in Skyreach for example, which we'll get into, which is one of the key, probably the best farming location in the game for XP. And this is really strong because not only does it provide us with the Assassination XP leveling, but whenever we kill an enemy we gain 8 ultimate, which means if we're killing multiple enemies at once, we're going to be getting Veil of Blades, which in turn gives us even more AoE, meaning we can really cleave down enemies very effectively. So before we get into talking about various ways you can go about leveling your tank, there's a few other things I want to talk about. So as I mentioned before, I highlighted that two-hander actually synergizes very well with Vampire's Kiss, and the reason behind it is this ability here. Now Brawler is a morph of the first ability in the two-handed tree, which is available from level 2 onwards, and this is why it is particularly strong in comparison to other damaging options such as dual wield or bow, because we can get access to this very quickly, and since it is a level 2 skill that unlocks, and by level 2 I mean it unlocks at level 2 two-handed, it means that we can also morph it very quickly. Now, when you do morph it, honestly the difference is night and day. Brawler is an amazing ability, especially when we're trying to kill multiple enemies at once, as the damage shield it provides is incredibly strong, while also doing decent AoE damage, meaning that they can cleave them down pretty well. Now the shield is good because it synergizes well with our self-heals, which, if we didn't have the shield, would probably not be able to keep up with the damage incoming. So when we have this damage shield, rather than just having our health stay at 50% or something, the self-heals will bring it back up to 100, meaning that if we refresh Brawler, by casting it, and we will be casting this quite a lot, it means that we can actually ensure that our health is kept at a healthy level for pretty much the entire fight, unless we get CC'd briefly, and if we do get CC'd, it'll rocket back up once we get our self-shield, back and running. Just to keep in mind how strong this is, you will see in the clips that honestly you can get up to a 10k HP shield, which is quite large for lower end content, especially as a newer player, and it's probably one of the best ways to get a really strong self-shield in AoE environments very quickly, and I don't think from checking that any class really can provide a self-shield like this, at least not until you get to, perhaps level 20 or 30 in the skill trees. The next thing I want to talk about is the champion point system, and when I was thinking about this I was actually a little bit torn, because for newer players we're not going to have access to champion points, and for veteran players, we're going to have a very large advantage. However, what I wanted to really make clear was that this build does not require you to have champion points, and that you can do the content I'll showcase very shortly perfectly easily without it. Now if you do have all the champion points, feel free to allocate them in a way that you would allocate to a DPS, for example, with points into extra damage, into stamina cost reduction, and also into, the usual passes in the Lady Tree, which is Hardy and Elemental Defender. In the interest of keeping a middle ground though between new players and veteran players, what I've done here is assign 50 points into the red, the green, and the blue. So here you see here, I've put 30 points into Hardy and 20 into Elemental Defender. Now you can allocate this dependent on your tastes, and an even split is probably the most general guide I can give you on that, and this is great because it reduces the amount of damage you take by a significant margin. The next allocation is 50 points into Warlord, and this is excellent because it allows us to cast more stamina based abilities, and most of our spammables are stamina, so we get a lot of mileage out of this cost reduction. The reason I didn't go for Mooncalf is because obviously sometimes we'll be blocking as a tank, meaning that the efficacy of this isn't quite as strong. Finally, we put 50 points into Mighty, and this is just to increase the amount of damage our two-hander in particular is doing, and is probably one of the strongest ways to quickly give us a damage increase. Now obviously, as I said before, if you do have many CP, feel free to allocate this in a way you would allocate one of your stamina DPS, but for now I just wanted to provide a very kind of low 50 points into each one, which is probably roughly the amount you'd have if you were 150 to 160 CP, and perhaps looking to start a new character. Anyways, with that CP discussion dispensed with, let's get into the few ways I want to talk about with regards to how you can level your tank. So the number one grind spot in terms of getting XP just from killing enemies is going to be Skyreach. In order to get to Skyreach, first off, we have to get to Craglorn. Now if you haven't got any friends to just teleport to easily, you can get to Craglorn by finding the Stargazer Herald in the main city, in this case Stormhaven, chatting to him, going for the dialogue, at which point he'll offer you transport on his cart. So all we have to do now is run up to it, press E, and it'll take us to Craglorn. That's one of the easy ways to get there. Now if you do have some friends who are in Craglorn, you can teleport to them, or if you have a guild likewise, see if anyone's in Craglorn, and simply by right clicking on their name and teleporting, you can get to Craglorn very easily. Now once you're there, you want to get to the Skyreach Way Shrine, which as you see is in the upper end of Craglorn, and a little bit of a walk away from where you first get in, when you take the car or you travel into the banking area. So either way, you can get a port there if you find someone nearby who can help you get a lift, or you just have to make your way by following the paths to get there, which will necessitate you actually going up into Upper Craglorn. So the best way to do that is just to follow the roads on the map so that you don't run into a cliff and get a little bit irritated. Anyways, once we do get to the Skyreach Way Shrine and we're able to travel back and forth quite quickly, the path you want to follow is the one you're watching on your screen right now, and we're going to be getting to Skyreach, which, just as a preface, I do recommend having a partner with, as you see on the screen right now. Now this content is soloable, and I will include a brief clip of me doing it solo with this build, but honestly the amount of time it takes for you to do it is going to be greatly reduced if you have an ally who's also running a similar build, as one of the things I noticed, as I sort of mentioned before, is if your ally is a little bit squishy, they may actually die quite a bit as they don't have very strong self-heals at low level. The following footage you will see will be an entire run, but I'm going to speed it up so that we don't have to sit here for the 10 minutes it took. What I'm going to point out though is the kind of key important things to keep in mind when you're doing this, and also it's important to keep attention to where we're stacking the enemies, and by stacking what I mean is we're going to be drawing them around corners so that the range that is all stack up, allowing us to AoE them down efficiently. The reason I say that you should pay attention to that in particular is because this will be a hell of a lot easier if you do stack them that way, as otherwise you might have to individually go around, and as you looked at the, if you looked at the tooltip of Brawler, the AoE on our two-hander, it scales based on the amount of enemies we hit, so we want to try and maximise the amount of enemies we're hitting at once, otherwise we might find ourselves not really having such a strong self-shield as we otherwise would hope for. So as you see here, we're drawing both enemies from both sides of this big room that we come into, kind of the lobby I guess. We're going to draw them all together, and then we're going to AoE them down. At this point, feel free to activate ultimates to put down your AoEs and your heals, in this case Refreshing Path, and then start to AoE them down. As you see, the self-shield that we'll be getting will be quite substantial. The strength of the shield is so good when we're hitting multiple enemies that even when we're standing, as you saw just then in multiple AoEs, we can still heal through it very effectively, and it's only when there's only a few left and the shield diminishes in terms of its strength that we want to back out a little bit. So now we're going to speed it up, and what I want you to pay attention to is how we're stacking the enemies and what enemies we're actually grabbing. So we're running in an anti-clockwise fashion around the kind of complex, and what we're doing here is just tagging enemies and drawing them to one corner once we've gotten enough of them. So here we are, this is the first corner you guys want to go with, and when they're all stacked up like this, what we're going to do is ulti-bomb and kill all of the enemies that are melee very quickly. And it's going to activate our Vampire's Kiss, meaning that we have nice heals, as you see on the right hand corner of your screen. That might be going a little bit fast. Now when you are doing this, you notice that our stamina and our resources might go a little bit low, but as you see, it will rocket back up once we get these resources regenning, and try and weave some heavy attacks as well, if possible. Now this does get a little bit hairy, as you see here, but luckily we do manage to still do it, and as you see, once we get a little bit of better control on the situation and we stop getting feared. Oh, and by the way, fear is one of the reasons why it's better to do it in a duo, because if I was getting feared solo, we might actually die in some situations, but we do manage to just get by it. And this was a little bit hairy, but to be honest, that run there was probably less efficient than a general situation case, and we probably didn't do it quite as well as we could have. If we were to improve that run just then, what we should have done is drawn all the melee adds into the ranged pack so we could kill them all at once rather than killing them separately. So once again, we pulled some more and we stacked them in that corner what you saw just then very briefly, and we're aiming them down. Now one of the tips to keep in mind when you are stacking the adds is to try and keep in the corner. As you saw, we've already highlighted 2 points where you stack them. Try and keep in that point until you see all the ranged adds stack nicely close together. If you just come out as soon as one stacks, it does mean it might be a little bit scattered, and this fight was a little bit scattered because of that. We probably could have taken a little bit more time. However, this run, as I just want to reinforce again, it was strictly a very average run, and some of your runs may go a lot smoother, but in a similar vein, some of them might go a little bit more rough if you don't follow good stacking procedures. The pull we are watching here is when you activate the Nedic box in the middle of the room, and it's very nice because we don't have to worry about kiting the enemies and then stacking them. They're going to stack themselves, allowing us to just focus on keeping our heals up and doing our AoEs and cleaving them down. Now once again, I want to reinforce the fact that if you do run low on stamina, make sure to heavy weave to get your stamina back, or use any resource management tools you have available to you. For Nightblade, Siphoning Strikes is a great one just to reinforce that point. Now keep in mind that if you do want to do this safely, I recommend casting a self-heal alongside using one cast for two-handed AoE ability to get our damage shield, and then go for a heavy attack to maximise the chances of not dying, as with that amount of shielding there should be no way that we're going to get alpha that quickly. So go ahead and try that out. Now as you see here, even with standing in all these AoEs, we're still relatively healthy and we clear it with no problems. One thing I will just reinforce once again is that my ally here is using a similar build to me, and at the very least ensure he's using a two-hander with the carve ability morphed to the damage shield variant, so that he can successfully tank if the aggro goes onto him. If not, you may find that he dies quite frequently, and it'll just make the time it takes for you to clear this significantly longer. In addition to that, I just want to mention, if you do have a high CP friend willing to carry you, this makes the dungeon a hell of a lot faster, and if you have that luxury, go ahead and do so. But just keep in mind it's absolutely not necessary, and you and your buddy who are just starting out the game and want to grind to 50 as fast as possible can definitely take advantage of Scar Reach as long as you have, the key abilities, namely a self-heal and the two-handed AoE cleave ability morphed to Brawler to give you that strong damage shield which will allow you to tank multiple adds at once without really much effort whatsoever, as long as you don't run out of stamina. So that's the final pull. As you saw, we did stack it around the corner there. Sorry for not pointing it out, so if you do want to quickly rewind to check that out, feel free to. Basically, after that, just to reiterate, when we're repeating this, we'll go outside the dungeon, we'll disband our group, and when we reform the group, it's going to give us a fresh instance full of enemies to kill again, and lots of XP to gain. And we'll just rinse and repeat. Go back to the lobby as we saw at the start, draw all the adds in, and then go in a counterclockwise fashion around in a big circle, killing the adds as we go, stacking them at the particular points I highlighted in the video, and then once again, exiting, disbanding group, reforming. And this will be the best way for you to gain XP if you want to hit 50 fast. Now the next method, if that looked a little bit too kind of involved for you, is to do dolmen farming. And Alik'r is the premier spot for doing so because of how the dolmens are distributed around the area, making farming very efficient. Now if you haven't got access to Alik'r, the best way to do so is to find a boatswain in one of your cities, and this will, just by highlighting the kind of boatswain icon, tell you where it takes you to. For example, in Stormhaven, in Wayrest, you can get a boat straight to Alik'r, and then you can find your way to the dolmens. However, alternative ways is to perhaps start in Glenumbra and take the boat to Stormhaven and then to Alik'r, Though if you're not from that faction, I would recommend highlighting over the boatswain icon in Alik'r to find out whereabouts you need to go, and just very quickly to highlight, pretty much the best ways to get there is either from taking a boat to Glenumbra from the other capital cities' starting areas, such as, within Stonefalls or within Auradon. Alternatively, you can also take it from Eastmarch, for example, in Windhelm, which will take you straight to Alik'r, saving you some time. If you don't want to go through that though, and you are part of a guild or have some friends who have a port, simply porting to them while they're in Alik'r will get you there straight away without having to worry about the boatswain, the boatswain journey, having to go in between different boat trips to get to Alik'r. Anyways, once you are at Alik'r, what you're going to have presented before you is a bunch of dolmens that you want to try and unlock. And as you see right now, what we're doing is, and I'm showing it on the map, is the first dolmen we want to find. Now, yes, this is a group activity in that you want to have many people farming the dolmen to make it easy, but there's almost always a group running, which means that, as you see here, I just ported in and instantly found a group, and you don't even have to be part of the group to get your XP. Simply cast AoEs around the place, tag the boss at the end, and wait for the dolmen to get completed, and you'll get a nice sum of XP for honestly very little effort and very little risk, as you'll pretty much never die unless you do something a little bit too risky, such as trying to do it solo. Now once you do complete it, there is a chest to your right, though I think, right now I actually forget to get the chest and just head off following the group. One thing I will say is that if you're not in the group and you prefer playing solo, just try and pay attention to the rotation they're doing. There are 3 dolmens that we're going to be going around and sort of going through the rotation, and you have to try and guess are they going anti-clockwise or clockwise in terms of which dolmen they're teleporting to. Now, if you don't have all the allocations unlocked yet, I would recommend at least joining the group to begin with, so that you can just, teleport to them, as it will take you to the required way shrine once you teleport to a group member who's, for example, already teleported to the way shrine I just teleported to, and this will allow you to, when solo, just teleport yourself without having to be in a big group. Now, once we've teleported, we're just going to go ahead and travel to the location of the dolmen, clear the dolmen, get the loot, and then travel to the next one. And once we've travelled to all 3, we just rinse and repeat and do it, rinse and repeat the process. And it's a very easy kind of AFK manner of doing things, honestly. In addition to that, we're also going to be leveling up our Fighters Guild. As you see, just by tagging the Daedra that spawn, we're going to be getting Fighters Guild experience, which means we can level up that skill line at the same time as leveling. Also note that by doing this, we're also going to be getting XP from completing the dolmen, as that also rewards XP for the Fighters Guild. So it's a nice way of getting Fighters Guild in addition to leveling, as well as being an easier choice. Anyways, I'm going to fast forward the rest of this footage, but hopefully you get the idea. We're just going in a circular motion, following the group and rinse repeating to get our XP in a very kind of safe and efficient manner, as the dolmen locations in Alik'r are quite well sort of situated and make it quite easy for farming. So while in the background I'm completing a dolmen rotation by completing all the dolmens and going back to where we started, I want to briefly talk about the next option, which is questing in dungeons. Now with regards to dungeons are a really nice way of not only getting XP if you do the random dungeon group finder, which gives you extra XP once per day, but also allows you to get some tanking skills and knowledge in a way you might not otherwise have. In addition to that, if you go around fighting any of the world bosses, if you're perhaps looking for more of a first time clear and it's your first time playing, you can also get practice of tanking that boss and allowing your group to kill it, as it does hit quite hard. So even in the open world, there's ways that you can get some experience as a tank, practicing maintaining aggro, practicing keeping your health bar up, and also practicing maintaining your resources. Now I know that so far what I've listed are methods designed to try and get you leveled up as quickly and or as easily as possible, but what are some of the benefits of perhaps doing some questing or some dungeons? Well, not only are they going to introduce some tanky mechanics, perhaps in world boss situations, or, in boss situations, you're going to learn how to tank effectively, but in addition to that, it's also going to introduce the story of the game, the lore of the game, and allow you to be immersed. I think this is especially important for a player who's playing on their first character, or perhaps is playing for zones they haven't played yet, because, at least for my first time, I find it very enjoyable to actually go through the story rather than just skipping ahead. In addition to that, it's worthwhile keeping in mind that both of the methods I've raised so far do not get you skill points. However, if you're going for the dungeons, you get a skill point each time you complete the quest, for the first time in that dungeon, and you'll also be getting skill points doing various quests, such as the storyline quests, such as public dungeon sort of random events, and you'll also be getting skill points just from collecting sky shards when you explore the world. That is probably the key benefit. So, to sum it up, is getting sky shards to allow you to unlock more abilities, and also introducing you to the lore and giving you some valuable tanking experience for when you get to endgame. And it's why I can't stress enough that I would recommend having a mix of leveling in, in your journey to max cap. I'd recommend a mix of not only getting XP very quickly, but also exploring the world, getting your skill points, and learning how to tank a little bit before we get to the harder content, where people will expect you to be able to fulfill your role to a reasonable high standard. So just for the sake of being complete, here's some footage showing a typical quest, and this is just going to be something you'll find in open world. You see a little icon, as you saw just then, and you'll chat to someone and see what's wrong with him, what's going wrong, how does he need help. Then once you pick up the quest, and feel free to look for the dialogue as I did here, once you pick that up you're going to be sent off to probably kill some enemies, save some damsels in distress, or just do something for particular town people so that their lives are back to normal. Now this can be enjoyable, as I've said already, and will sort of make you feel more invested in the game from a lore standpoint, and perhaps will then later on allow you to actually appreciate the storylines you may stumble across in the future, as sometimes these storylines tend to be connected. In addition to that, it's also nice that the game will sometimes sort of reflect what you've done. It will maybe change the instance you're in to reflect some changes you've done. Maybe the town will become inhabited again, maybe the bad guys will be gone, and so it's something I'd recommend as a first time playthrough. Now I don't want to dwell too much on this, as you get the general sort of view of this. We're going around talking to NPCs, killing enemies, doing quests. It's pretty much, in line with the MMO formula, just to keep that in mind. Now I'm very briefly going to show you some clips just of a random dungeon, and we're just going to show you how to get into that, and then basically the end of it and sort of the rewards you get from it. So in order to get yourself into a random dungeon very quickly without having to have any friends per se, you just go to the group finder and click join queue in the random group tool. Now as you see here, it's going to give us bonus XP for our first complete, so it's really worthwhile at least doing it once a day, and then waiting until it resets to come back again. As you see here, we didn't have to wait too quickly at all, and that is one of the benefits of being a tank, or at least running a sword and board front bar to be a tank when we're not, farming trash, because that allows us to actually get into group dungeons very quickly and gets us some crucial experience, which will hopefully stand us in good stead moving onwards. So now that I've just covered that bit, we'll also see very briefly when we load in that the quest I was talking about, which rewards a skill point on completion, is available right there. Alongside also, sometimes there will be lore books, which allows you to get your mage's guild up being present within these areas. Now throughout this dungeon, what you'll see me do is, as I'll probably point out from time to time, is pretty much just apply AoE to the enemies when we're tanking them, but it's worth keeping in mind a few tips for doing so. So since we are trying to provide some extra damage to speed things up, it's important to note that yes, we want to taunt the enemies, but try not to block too much, as we want to maintain our stamina at a decent level. Now at the start of this dungeon, you'll see me actually not realise that quite yet, and I will be blocking, as you see here, when applying taunt to things to keep aggro. What I would recommend in the future, and as you'll see me adapt later on, is pretty much take taunt on as many things as you can, primarily the melee DPS enemies that you find, and then go ahead just using using Brawler to get your damage shield, which means that even though you're not blocking, you'll still be not taking that much damage due to the damage shield. Now, other than that, that's pretty much all I have to say about this. I'm going to speed it up very quickly and talk about some closing remarks before we finish up this video. So what I've skipped to here is just one of the boss fights with AoE, and as you notice here I lag quite a bit and I can't activate abilities, but that's part and parcel of Australian ping, unfortunately. Anyways, what I wanted to demonstrate is that when you are tanking bosses such as this, make sure that your first job is to maintain aggro and hold taunt and debuff the boss with heroic slash, things like that. However, when ads spawn, like you see them periodically with the mud crabs, feel free to swap to your other bar and just apply your AoE with your bullet. You don't want to call it a bully, but it's brawler. You get the idea. Applying your brawler AoE to allow you to kill the mud crabs quickly, and also keep in mind, holding taunt on the boss while we're doing this. Also, we can apply some execute damage with our impale to the boss as well, which allows us to clear it a little bit faster than we otherwise would. In addition to that, make sure you're paying attention to the boss's mechanics, as it is important to ensure that we're not bar swapping to do some DPS and then get heavy attacked, as we could die, and it's also important to try and support our group as much as possible, such as when the boss does an AoE attack, it's nice to pop an ultimate or keep heroic slash debuff on the boss to reduce his damage. This is really important as well to focus on your tanking specifically rather than your DPS purely, as this is where we get our valuable experience, which will stand us in good stead for later in content. Due to my inventory being full, one thing that does come to mind which can help you out is that when you do get a full inventory, feel free to sell things and repair your armor, as the money you get from selling will make up the cost and even make you profit from repairing your armor back to its full durability. In addition to that, if you do get any upgrades, be that rings, be that enchants you can use in your armor, things like that from drops, don't hesitate to use that, so do check what you got before selling it, as sometimes you can get some nice upgrades which will help you in your grinding or your dungeon experience or questing experience. In regards to that, I would also recommend trying to upgrade your bag space and locating a bag space vendor for that purpose. The first two upgrades are very cheap and will allow you to last longer, be it questing, be it doing grinds, without having to go back to base and sell up your items. And also keep in mind that you can upgrade the capacity of your horse, the carry capacity, which means you'll be able to carry more items, though if you are planning on doing a lot of travelling over land and not just grinding, you may want to consider doing speed instead. So that's about all I have for you today, and if this video did help you out, please let me know in the comments below, and if you ever need any help, please don't hesitate to ask and I'll be happy to assist. So until next time guys, bye for now.